Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. We're going to have just a moment to let the remainder of our participants enter the waiting room and wait for those numbers to stop moving. Appreciate you coming tonight for the K-5 report card parent session. My name is Aaron Boffman, the Assistant Superintendent for Instructional Services. I'm joined tonight by Dr. Sandra Brock, the Director of Instructional Programs. We're here this evening to share with you a little bit of information about the new K-5 report card that will be utilized this year for the first time, and to answer any questions you might have about that. On the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button, and if you click on that button, you'll be able to ask any questions that come up during this presentation. We'll go through the presentation, and then at the end, if it's a question we haven't yet answered, we will certainly take a few minutes to go through those answers. We are recording this session so that we can post it later for those who want to see it again or who weren't able to be here tonight. And certainly if you have any questions after this session, we're always happy to have you contact us and let us know. We'll get information for you as quickly as we can. So we'll get started. Just to let you know, the K-5 report card is a work in progress that's occurred over the last 2 years. And we've really focused this year, over the last 2 years, really, with the report card team, which is a member of about 35 elementary teachers and principals who came together 2 years ago to work on creating a parent-centered report card. The report card is supposed to be a way that we communicate with parents what your child is able to do and where they can grow. And so this report card has been redesigned to give you the clearest and best information. We try to make it as parent-friendly as possible because really, the report card is really just for you. It's not really even for your child. It's really for the parent to know how they're doing, to update their progress and to make them aware. So as we move through this, know that during this process, this has not been something that has been lightly done or done without great care and concern. 2 years ago, we began the process, like I said, with a group of 35 teachers and principals. The team began by looking at other school districts who have made the switch to a truly parent-centered, standards-based report card. We looked at school districts including Ann Arbor, Novi, Dearborn, South Lyon, Troy, Allen Park, and really a lot of others, Bloomfield, Birmingham, and other places. We took a lot of time to really dig into the best practice research and understand what is most important to parents in grading. We had a chance to share some feedback session with parents and spoke to parents along the way, shared even the updated copies of the report card, both with staff and with parents. Really, this happened in 3 distinct cycles. We would work on the report card, share it out, get feedback, make changes. Again, share it out, get feedback, make changes. This happened in the last 2 years in 3 different cycles. Ultimately, it was reviewed by our district curriculum council once we had gone through that 3rd cycle. And then the Board of Education also had discussion and feedback. There were committee meetings where we met with principals and different committees throughout the district. And then ultimately, a Board of Ed approval once we had some parent feedback sessions prior to the final approval by the board. So this has been a long system that we've gone through to make sure that we give as much clear information as we can. Here is an example of the sample report card. Here's a Silver Springs report card. They all look the same with different logos. But I want to first start out by saying that in this report card, what you're going to see is a very clear standards-based approach of a 1, 2, and 3. 1 identifies a couple of things. 1, that the student has not developed the understanding they need, and 2, that they need extensive or additional support in this area. So if a child receives a 1, it's not a matter of them doing something wrong. It simply tells you that they're not yet able to do that skill. And it's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just what it is. And so the teacher's able to say to you, this is an area where we have work to do. If you have a 2, it's called approaching the standard. And in that case, the child is starting to show an understanding of that skill or concept, but they still need some support. It's needed along the way. And then there's number 3, which means the student has met that standard and has done everything they need to show mastery of that standard, and they can do it not only correctly, but independently and apply that skill. For example, if the standard were to say count from 0 to 100, the first report card, maybe the child can count from 0 to 20. Maybe the child can count from 0 to 50. But until they get to 0 to 100, they wouldn't have that 3 because they haven't yet met that standard. But you as a parent know along the way how much progress they're making because the teacher's giving you the most up-to-date information about that particular standard. We did try to really dig into the standards. What was true of the previous report card is sometimes the standards covered too many things in one line, and so the parent couldn't really tell what part of that standard they didn't know. And so we tried to break it down to be very clear in one piece of the standard at a time. So understanding if my child can classify shapes, can they solve word problems with time? Can they solve word problems with mass and volume? So very clear, very simple, very straightforward, looking at the most critical concepts that your child should know in that grade level. Before they move on, these are the things they really must know in order to be successful in the future. So you'll see here a few of those examples of what I believe here is a third grade report card, but built very similarly for everyone. You also see here in a reading example, again, we try to identify the most important skills necessary in reading, and we broke them down by the skills, including those foundational skills. As a third grader, can I read at grade level? And that's done by doing some of our reading inventory and making sure that we're testing our students to identify what level at which they're reading and are they fluent at that grade level. Again, if a student is reading at a second grade level in third grade, they're likely going to have a 1 or a 2, depending on how much of a struggle it is for them still and how much support they need, because they're not reading at grade level. And so again, it's not a bad thing, it's not a good thing, it's just an answer to where they're at the moment. But again, we tried to identify very specifically, determine the main idea with key details. This is something they have to be able to do. So these things, and again, one card marking, they may be marked, another card marking, they may not, because they didn't cover that standard again. You also may find in first card marking, there are things that are not marked that will be marked in future card markings in second or third because they aren't yet covered in this first trimester. We want to talk a little bit about why 3 card markings as well, and that was very intentional. In elementary school, we spend a lot of time looking in 3 cycles. We test our NWA tests, benchmark tests 3 times a year, fall, winter, spring. We also have our MTSS, which is our multi-tiered systems of support, where we identify students who are struggling and we provide them that resources and help. But that's done in 3 cycles. And so that we, every trimester, we're really working together with our teams to identify those students who need additional support. And this testing cycle also will now align with our report card markings, which will be very beneficial, both to our teams and to parents. We also administer our reading assessments in 3 cycles, again, measuring what students are capable of and what level at which they're reading. We teach our writing in 3 genre narratives throughout the year, narrative, opinion, informational. And so it's done 3 times throughout the year. We teach our science in 3 major units, earth, physical, and life. And so because of so many of our pieces really falling into 3 cycles, it makes better sense for us to be able to provide the most accurate information. Because if we have 3 cycles in MTSS, we may be giving you information in November on a report card built on quarters. We don't yet have the most accurate information because that cycle hasn't hit yet. Because when you split it 4 pieces for the report card with 3 pieces for the MTSS cycle, those things don't line up. And so parents weren't receiving the most up-to-date and accurate information because they weren't aligned. And so card markings was really important for the team in order for us to be able to align those systems and to give parents the most accurate information so that when you get the report card, it's the freshest and most recent information regarding reading, regarding NWA, regarding MTSS. So it was very intentional, and we really wanted to focus on giving parents that up-to-date information. This year, the report card will be done in 3 different dates. The first one will be available on November 30th, which is a week from today. You'll be able to access it still in MyStar. Report cards will not be in Schoology, so you will still log into the parent portal in MyStar where you register your child every year. And you'll be able to click on the report card there and it'll show up for you. The second one will be on March 22nd, and the final one will be on the last day of school on June 17th, 2021. Parent-teacher conferences are aligned with the card markings this year. It was really important for the teachers to know that the card marking would line up so that parents would have the report card prior to the conferences. And that way the parents would have the information in front of them and teachers could speak to that information when they met with them. So our conferences will take place the week of December 1st through the 4th. And during that time, we will, your schools in particular will let you know what days and times are available. Your teachers will individually schedule those conferences with you. but they will occur during that week. And then our second set of conferences will occur March 25th and 26th of 2021, barring any changes in the schedule. Then, of course, tonight we have these parent information sessions to give more in-depth review and take some questions from parents. Also know that this will be repeated tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. We'd like to give an opportunity for parents who are available in the evening and those who are available in the day. So we'll repeat the same thing tomorrow if you have anybody who would like to join us. And again, we'll record and make this available. So I am going to just go back to the sample report card, pull it up here, and then take a look at the questions and answers that may be here so that we can answer any of them that exist. So the first question that comes up is, for a rating 1 or 2, how does a parent know if the child is receiving that rating because the class is still learning the topic versus getting that rating because the student's behind and not catching on? It's really good information. And so what our teachers are working on is working with parents to help them understand, again, if this is an issue of timing or whether it's an issue of the child is struggling. And so that's one of the reasons why parent conferences are so important, but also a way for our teachers to identify some notes. For example, we've got some standards that'll say things like addition and subtraction. And so if you get a 2, the question is it an addition problem, a subtraction problem, or both? And so those notes that we've spoken with teachers about are really important for them to convey information to say that these issues are a result of them being behind, or whether this is just where we are in the course of the year. Now, I will tell you that with the exception of a couple of standards, most everything is really covered in that card marking. For example, in science, the grade is going to be around life science. Well, that's not going to come up again. So likely, more often than not, if they get a 1 or a 2, it's because they are struggling or it's an area they need help in. Very rarely, except for places like reading at grade level, or something that may be a standard that gets covered all year, which are very few. There are more of those kinds of standards in the lower L, starting in kindergarten, really, where they're kind of covered throughout the year because there's so much learning to do. But as you get older, those standards become very specific to card markings typically, because we're going to cover this concept and we're going to move on, especially in areas like math or in science or in social studies. In reading, it is a little more generic, and I'll flip back to the reading here, because we may do organization and structure multiple times throughout the year, and that's where those notes are going to be really important. The second question that comes up is, are all the metrics intended to be completed by the end of the school year? The intention is yes. Every child by the end of the school year, ideally, would have a 3 at some point on that standard. And again, if the student receives a 3 first card marking, they may not be marked again, either because they don't cover it again or because they've already mastered it and there's no reason to mark it again. But again, the idea being that by the end of their year, they will have gotten a 3 on all these standards, because every standard you see on the report card is what's considered to be central to success at that grade level. So if they end the school year with something besides a 3, that's an area where they're going to need additional support and help. And certainly our multi-tiered systems and support team are going to be aware of that, and they're going to identify those needs. And also the teacher the following year will have that information on the report card because it's available to them, so that they can begin by saying, okay, this child's going to need help in these 2 areas because they ended the year without a 3. And it is the expectation that they would master all of these standards. Now, is that going to happen for every child? Probably not, but it is the outcome that we expect. We do have students who sometimes come to us with some deficiencies and or their grade levels behind. It could be any number of issues that are there, but we work hard to try to solve those problems and work with the parent and the child to get to some better understanding. And sometimes our learning consultants or our special ed department or others who are working with those children at that point. But yes, we do want 3s at some point in the year for every standard in order for students to move on. Next question says, thank you for this informational session. If the child receives a 1 or 2 on a competency, will the learning plans of the child be changed to accommodate? Absolutely. And this is not just true at the report card time, and this is something our teachers do on a daily and weekly basis. But if we do identify, if teachers identify a pattern either of a small group of kids or a large group of kids who are all struggling with specific learning outcomes, they're going to go back and reteach some of those concepts, sometimes in small groups if it's just a child or 2. Sometimes they may do an entire unit again or parts of a unit again to make sure there's understanding. But really every day our teachers use a formative assessment process to identify when kids didn't get something so that they don't move on without it. And again, it could be a small group, it could be a large group, but they're going to identify those issues. And the report card's a good time of year for them to run a report to say, what area did all of these students get twos in? Is this something that should happen because of the time of year it is? Or do I have a problem where the large group doesn't understand this concept well enough? Or do I have a small group I need to pull separately and work with individually? So a question came up about music, art, Spanish, and PE were asynchronous. How will they be assessed? You know, in a conversation with the Board of Ed and working with District Curriculum Council and several other groups, the determination has been made that humanities report cards will not be marked for this first card marking at least. And that is for a number of factors. Some of our humanities teachers are not teaching, well, none of our humanities teachers are teaching in their classroom. So art is coming to them. PE is the only one where students actually go to the actual room. So music is done in their general classroom. As a result, our humanities teachers have had to modify some of their work that they do with kids. And certainly they want to have kids have the experience and get a chance to really enjoy art and music and world language, but it's been a struggle as a result of either the asynchronous work or really even in person having access to their musical instruments and their art rooms. So they are providing that opportunity for kids to enjoy and have that information, but it's been very difficult to assess. So they will not be assessed. And a notice will go out to parents making them aware of that. So you won't see those marked in first card marking for those 4 humanities areas. Will there be differences between virtual and in-person students regarding the grading? So there will not be a difference between them. Virtual teachers are teaching the exact same curriculum, same lessons, same materials, just being taught through a computer. Our in-person students are receiving the exact same instruction, just delivered differently. So there should not be an expectation of anything different. Our students at home and our students in the school should be at the same level at the same time, or the expected level. Again, there are going to be students who struggle, but they should all get to the same level and they should all be on the same pace generally, even if they're a day or a couple of days ahead or behind. We do expect our at-home students and our in-person students to receive the same education. So they should be marked very similarly. I'm just going through the questions here to see if there's anything else I'm missing.
Mr. Baughman, there's a question about, is there a comment area for teachers like in the previous report card?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so there is a comment area, one for pre-slug comments like you've seen in the past, like child's a pleasure to have in class kind of things. So teachers can choose a number, but there's also a place for them to provide their own notes, might be to identify their reading level or to tell you about some specific concern they have, or hey, in this standard, I just want you to know that X, Y, and Z is true. So there is a chance for them to write a short narrative that will certainly lengthen the report card, but they're digital, so it's just a matter of scrolling through additional pages. Someone says, how is it different than last year? It looks similar. So structure-wise, we still use the same system. It's called MyStar. And MyStar is our student information system. So the report card still comes from the same place, but structurally, it's going to look very similar because it's just the way the report card prints. We don't change the actual structure. What you're going to see that's very different, of course, is the 1, 2, 3 is very different. The 3 card markings is very different, and we have taken the standards and broken them into very small individual pieces and identified only the most important ones. In the past, you might have had several things packed into one standard, and it was hard for parents to know which of these pieces in the standard are you referring to when you mark this report card. So we went through and overhauled all of the standards, so those are not identical. There might be a couple of places they look similar, but structure-wise, it looks identical because it's coming from the same place, and that just is the nature of having a student information system that says, give me the grade, I'll put it on a piece of paper for you, so this is what it looks like. So if you put them side by side physically, they might look the same, but the content should be very different. Does everything saying about report card grading, no grades for art classes apply for grades K-12? No, that's not true. So very big difference between elementary and middle and high school. Middle and high school students have art, PE, and all those courses that they elect to have on a regular basis. In elementary, they see them once a week for 45 minutes. So very different. So typically during the card marking, humanities teachers, which is what we call our K-5 art, music, PE, or language teachers, they may only see a group of kids 9 or 10 times. They're only seeing them once a week. In some cases, they might have a double period depending on how the schedule was done, but they see them much less often. So you can expect, if you have 6 through 12 graders, you will see grades for all subjects, including electives, humanities, or any other courses that your child has signed up for. This will only be true in the K-5, where the scheduling is very different, where there's asynchronous for those students who are virtual, and also because they are coming to the children instead of the children going to them. One of the questions here, what happens if a child excels considerably with 3s, while some or most of the class is averaging 2s? Will the student with higher interest in learning be held back or challenged with more advanced? But this is an expectation we always have for our staff, and that's true whether it's now or whether the report card comes out, that when a child's identified to have been excelling, we always expect a differentiation to occur so that a child is given the opportunity to enrich and to enhance their skills, might be by applying the task or doing something different, or even giving them altogether different material. So yeah, I mean, that shouldn't happen just when report cards come out. That should happen really all school year. And so if you feel like that's a concern where your child is not being challenged enough, or they're in a classroom where they're kind of soaring and others are really struggling, certainly a conversation first to have with the teacher. But that's not something that we want to wait till report card time to find out. That's something that we want to be doing. And typically our teachers are going to identify pretty quickly, oh, this student is clearly, capable of doing this work already. I'm going to need to do something different with them while everyone else is doing this. Now, in a place like reading, we do that with small groups because we identify quickly some students are above grade level when it comes to reading, some come in at the grade level, some come in below the grade level. And so our teachers typically put them in small groups, similar to our math work as well. Teachers can identify and kind of cluster students around the things that they're struggling with. And those aren't year-long groups, they're just for now groups. Because when you move to the next concept, that might change completely. This group might have members of it from that group that need to be put together because this concept is a struggle for the kid who wasn't struggling with it in a previous concept. So those things are always changing, but always expected, that differentiation that should occur from one child to the next. Dr. Bach, do you see any others that I have not? They kind of come in out of order sometimes.
Just maybe the question about getting a 1 or 2 and then progression to the next grade at the end of that year. So would that impact grade advancement if they have some 1s or 2s?
1s or 2 doesn't necessarily mean grade advancement is going to be changed. Grade advancement would if we were going to retain a student, first of all, you would know well in advance of the end of the year. That'd be a conversation you'd be having even before January. You would have been notified by MTSS team or a multi-tiered system support team, your teacher or others in the building. Typically a 1 or 2 is simply going to say to the next teacher, this is an area this child's going to need some additional help with, but it's not going to be a reason to retain any child in elementary school. It's simply, again, just relaying information so that teachers and parents have the most accurate information to provide the most accurate help we can. Similar to our NWEA test, a low score doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem with moving on to the next grade level. It means, hey, this is an area I'm going to need to spend some time on in order for this child to move on to the next concept or standard. And also can explain to the teacher, if a student is struggling, they can go back and say, oh, now I see, because this is an issue that they were having. We need to work on this and go through and look at a subset. Okay, any others that you see?
No, maybe just how well are teachers being able to address small groups? So maybe just the whole piece of differentiation.
Yeah, so certainly our teachers are going to be looking, again, long before the report card to say, what do kids need? How do I group them together? How do I give them the best information? And so our teachers are always giving some sort of assessment, even if it's just on the spot where they're just taking an inventory and watching students, or they may give them a few questions just to answer. And using that information, what we call formative assessment, we're putting kids together to say, okay, I've got 4 kids who don't understand this. I'm going to work with them separately while I move everyone else forward on some sort of independent work. And then we're going to come back together and move on to the next concept. Or today, there's a large group of our kids who didn't understand what we did yesterday. I'm going to start the day off by redoing some of that before we move on because it's important. And really, again, this is not about the report card. That's something that happens starting in September. But the report card will relay large picture of, okay, this chunk of time, all the kids were supposed to be able to do X, and I've got this many who can't. What do I need to do second card marking to modify that? It might mean making some adjustments to their units or redoing sections of different materials that they've already covered, but always looking and always making those changes.
So the last question I see is, are there going to still be letter grades for grades 4 and 5? So I think we have to be clear.
Yeah, so that's a major difference as well. And certainly in a standards-based report card, we're always looking just to say what the child can do. And so letter grades will not exist in K-5 at all. They have not existed in K-3 for many years. And this year that'll extend to 4th and 5th grade, because again, we're just looking at what the standard is and can the child do that. It's not about how much work they did or how much participation. Again, we want parents to know, because these are such formative years, we want them to know what their child can and cannot do, not necessarily how much work they did or didn't turn in. Now that certainly becomes more and more important as you move up in the grade levels, and GPAs and credits and all those things become part of it. But at this level, it's an opportunity for us to really dig in and give real information. So, it's not the end of the world if they have a 1, because it's not about them doing something wrong or right. It's just informing the parent and the teacher about the issue that exists. Okay, this child really needs help in this area, because if we give them an A because they did all the work and they completed enough, but they really don't understand the concept, it really sets them up for disaster later. And so this is the time in K-5 when those stakes are much lower, where we can really dig in and give that kind of clear information to parents without there being the fear or worry about what that grade is going to be. So there will just be the 1, 2, and 3 in the report card for this year for all K-5.
So questions about the 3rd grade reading legislation and when parents will be notified?
So 3rd grade reading legislation, for those of you that aren't aware, identifies that if a student's not reading at grade level, starting in kindergarten, that they're identified with what's called an individual reading improvement plan. And that happens pretty early on. And so really those students who are in need of an IRIP, that's what we call it, those students would be notified really probably this week. They would have already received some notification. So if your child is in a situation where they need an IRIP and they're in kindergarten through 3rd grade, they will be notified by a member of the MTSS team that says, hey, your child is reading below grade level. This is what we're going to do. They typically will set up a meeting with you. It's typically happening this week, really. And it sometimes takes the place of your parent conference that's coming up, because it's a longer meeting and it's with a group of individuals. It's not just the teacher, but it'll be a chance for you to really go through. Last year, this law was put in abeyance because of COVID and the closure to school. So students last year who were in 3rd grade who were not at reading level were expected to be retained. In Northville schools, it's a very small group of kids. It's not a large group. And again, retention is a big deal. So we would be having that conversation with you early and often if there was a concern. This year, we for all that we know, we are expecting to give the standardized assessments in the spring. And those standardized assessments, the M-STEP, will be what the state uses to decide if a student should be retained or not. And again, even when that happens, we still have a conversation. There are several ways in which that retention may still not happen, which can include a portfolio of the student's work, a discussion about the kinds of things that have been done to allow the student to move forward. Sometimes the student may have an IEP, or they have an English second language student. And so there's several reasons why they may not end up being retained, but the 3rd grading law, as far as we know, nothing has changed for this year at this point. We are expecting to give the standardized assessment, and students who are in 3rd grade who are not at reading level, we will be having those conversations. But again, you should have been contacted by now if there is a concern in a kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade student who's not at reading level. Any others that you see, Dr. Brock?
The last one I see is NWA and testing for science, like it's been done in the past.
So our NWA testing for science, first of all, part of the issue is this year is that we're having to do so much testing virtually, and it was taking a lot of time. And so we found the critical information being those math and reading scores, and of course the language as well. So we really are giving 3 tests. The science scores, which actually are only even able to be given in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, we're taking a lot of time, and the information we were receiving was not being found to be very beneficial to our help and support that we need. And again, we don't want to do things for the sake of doing them. Our teachers felt like the information they were receiving from the work they were doing was more beneficial, and to take an additional day or two to provide that science testing it was not providing information that we wanted. And so we did decide this year to stop administering that test for a lot of different reasons. So it won't be given this year for a couple of different reasons, but most importantly, because we only want to take the time to give kids an assessment and take away from instruction if we feel like that assessment data is going to be really helpful and beneficial. And our teachers and staff didn't feel like that was anymore. So we did decide to remove it.
And I do want to add, we use the FOSS kits and also mystery science, and those have assessments as part of their programs, which directly correlate with what's going on in the classroom. So I think that teachers found that those assessments were more beneficial than NWA. So students are still being assessed in science.
This is a great question here that I think just came in. Can a student get a 3 in 1 strand, 1 card marking, and a 2 in that same strand? That's a great question, and the answer is yes, and I'll explain. So if you at reading level, for example, so we expect at the December report card or November 30th report card that a first grader is reading at a level E, and I'm just making that letter up. I'd have to have the chart in front of me. And that's the expectation, and they're reading at an E, they might have a 3 because they're at their grade level. That's what the grade level expectation is. But next card marking, for some reason, they're not making the progress and they stay at an E, or something's causing them not to move forward when they're tested again. They may find themselves having a 1 or 2 because during that card marking, they're not at the grade level expected. But again, it's information that's really important because otherwise you as a parent aren't going to know there's a problem if we were to have them at a 3 when really they're not making that grade level progress. So we want to make that change so that we identify the fact that there is a concern about the standard, even if they were able to. Now, again, those are standards that are few and far between because most standards are done during this card marking and probably won't be done again. And so with some exceptions, you may see some of that where it occurs again, and that's going to only be in standards that are covered over multiple card markings. Is there a reason that children are not required to do spelling tests or spell correctly? So spelling necessarily isn't an isolated subject. Our teachers do teach word work and vocabulary throughout the materials. It's not a traditional, all the time, a traditional kind of Friday spelling test like some of us may have remembered. It's really about teaching the vocabulary in context, so that spelling or spelling words correctly is something that is expected of students, but done in context of the work that they're reading or in the vocabulary for the work that they're doing currently in a new subject. It's just not done in isolation, and it's not just called a spelling subject separately. It's part of our reading block and part of what our students do during that time. Dr. Rock, anything you want to add on that?
No, I mean, I guess I would just say it's called word study. So when teachers talk about CVC, word study, those types of acronyms that educators use, that would be spelling embedded in the ELA curriculum.
So there is an expectation that our students are learning how to spell those words and most importantly, know what they mean and how to read them. But it is embedded differently than what we have seen in the past, which would have seen as a Friday test with 10 words in isolation or 20 words in isolation that weren't necessarily connected to the work they were doing. It might be, oh, it's Valentine's Day, we're going to do 20 words connected to Valentine's Day. So now it's embedded in the work they're doing, so it's more meaningful and it's connected to what they're doing, and they're learning how to read those words in context and understand their language and meaning as well. Okay, I don't see any new questions. Just checking one more time to make sure I'm not missing any. All right, I don't see any others. I'll give just a second to see if any more pop up here, if anyone else has any additional questions. Okay, well, I appreciate you all being here tonight. If you're not aware, we do have a board meeting this evening that actually just started 4 minutes ago. If you'd like to join us there, you're welcome to do so. The board will be having a conversation, a special call meeting tonight. We will again have this session tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock for those who may want to join. And also we'll post the recording of this so that you can go back and take a look at any pictures of the cards themselves or anything else. And again, this card marking has ended, and the report cards will be posted for you a week from today. First thing in the morning, you'll be able to access them on MyStar. All right. Thank you all so much for coming this evening. Have a wonderful evening. And if you have any further questions, please email Dr. Brock or I. It's our last name, first 2 initials. So Boffman AA@northvilleschools.org or Brock sa@northvilleschools.org. Feel free to contact us and we will get back with you as soon as we're able to. All right. Anything else, Dr. Brock?
No, that's it. Just thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.